Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the All Paths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization All Paths Family Building. And today we're talking to Annika about her journey and her work in this space. Annika, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, both personally and professionally. I love all the ways we can make families these days.
Absolutely. Well, before we get into your story in more detail, I'd love you to introduce yourself for our listeners.
So my name is Annika. I live in Waltham, Mass. I am an attorney who actually studied assisted reproductive technology in law school and have practiced it. And then eventually created my own family with my wife via reciprocal IVF. So my wife's egg and I carried, and here we are. So it was certainly interesting after having helped so many families go through the process to go through it myself. But it was, fantastic.
That's great.
Wonderful. That's such a unique perspective.
Yeah.
So let's start with the personal side of things. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to starting a family? Where did it all begin?
Yeah. So since I studied assisted reproductive technology in law school and went to some conferences and things like that, I had a good idea of the ways that my wife and I can make a baby, because neither of us naturally has sperm. So we knew that we couldn't just do it the quote unquote old-fashioned way. And we talked about a lot of different options when we got together in 2011. And as things got more serious, we talked about how cool something like reciprocal IVF would be, but it was just financially, we couldn't even have a concept of it. And then as we got kind of into talking about it more and more, as we got closer to reality, my wife said, well, one thing that's holding me back is I'm really not into the idea of carrying a pregnancy. But given my own family history, I'm really into the idea of having a baby genetically linked to me. And I was like, cool, I really want to carry a pregnancy. And I have absolutely no cares in the world about whether or not that baby is genetically linked to me or not. Honestly, we joke a lot. I'm a little sickly, like maybe better we don't. So, obviously would have not been a reason we wouldn't have in other circumstances, but I was just like, so let's, we're both established professionally now. The technology has advanced. Let's at least explore the affordability of reciprocal IVF now. And we talked about it with our shared OBGYN, another advantage of lesbianism. And she was so funny. She was like, first of all, I'm very supportive of this. Here, I think this is what it's going to cost, because we could talk a little later, it's not covered by insurance. But she was like, so I don't have any like medically things to back this up yet, hence the not covered by insurance. But Annika has polycystic ovaries, and Anna, my wife, has a history of blood clotting. So we'd probably have to do if she were carrying, she'd have to have a shot every day and all this stuff. So she's like, honestly, I think this is the best way for you to medically. I'm glad you came there from like a family making perspective, but I actually think there's nothing wrong with Annika's uterus. She's going to carry babies, great, but it could be a while to get pregnant. And then with Anna, no concerns about getting her pregnant, but keeping her pregnant could be a little more difficult. So, that's how it ended up working out. In the midst of professionally speaking, where we were advocating for the Massachusetts Parentage Act, along with All Paths Family Building. And my baby was born 8 weeks early. She was 5-pound preemie. So everyone assumed that she was at 32 weeks. And so they were like, oh, your dates are off. And I was like, oh, honey, this is a reciprocal IVF, baby. There is medical.
We know exactly when.
We know down to the second that she was inserted. We know down to the second that sperm was introduced to egg. Like, no, we're good. she's just a big girl. And to this day, she is 2.5 and already 40 inches tall. So she's just big. And it's funny because like we usually have the opposite problem with IVF babies. IVF babies are usually small. And I was like, here's my girl. I grow them big. So yeah, no, she's her name is Maya. She is affectionately known as the MPA baby because she was born during the process and campaigned for it both in utero and as a baby herself. And if you've watched any of the news coverage of the signing of the Massachusetts Parentage Act, she is the baby running around in the background saying, Mama, because she was about 18 months by that point.
Adorable.
Yes. I mean, she obviously the MPA took like over 8 years to pass. So she was literally a dream for a long time. She was trying to be conceived, and then she was in utero, and then she was eventually born and a baby, and then finally got to celebrate the bill being signed. So thank goodness. But yes, she became this most perfect demonstration of the time that had been spent on this. What was on your shirt that you wore to the MPA rally that we had in the rain?
Yep. It said a big arrow pointing to my pregnant stomach, and it said, I have to adopt this baby because of confirmatory adoption rules. And while the MPA made that not as important, the current administration then turned around and made it important again. But of course, being an attorney's daughter and the shoemaker's children have no shoes, my daughter was 1 by the time she was adopted. But
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and then thank you for sharing your family with the and your own time with the MPA advocacy. You had such an important role in that coalition, and obviously she made it so lovely and delightful too to have her be part of it. So you mentioned the financial worry even before you started doing it. The financial aspect of fertility treatment and specifically reciprocal IVF was part of the equation in terms of when you were even going to start trying.
Yep.
And can you talk a little bit more about that, why it isn't covered for you and your wife?
Yeah, so we were lucky. We had all of our doctor's visits, like the visits with the doctors themselves, was covered, but none of the procedures were covered. Sperm isn't covered ever. And so the reason it wasn't is because in Massachusetts, for insurance to cover fertility treatments, you need to prove a medical need, basically. So for straight couples, you have to try the old-fashioned way for I think it's 12 is it 12 months still? I don't know if they've changed it recently. 12 months. And then for same-sex couples who are using donated sperm, you have to do at least 6 months of IUI or ICI. And so we didn't do that because we did not want a child that resulted from donor sperm and my eggs and in my uterus, nor did we want in Anna's uterus. So because it was considered in that sense elective, so we decided to do it. Nothing was covered outside of the doctor's appointments. It would have been even more expensive if the doctor's appointments hadn't been covered. But we're also lucky in that we literally live 7 minutes from Boston IVF Waltham. So we would roll in for our morning appointments in our pajamas, and people like, oh, how far did you come? Did you have to stay overnight? Which so many people have to do. And we're like, nah, we could have walked if the weather was nice. So I felt we were very lucky, and it was still hard and difficult and frustrating. And everything, went for the most part right, quote unquote, for us. And it was easy, quote unquote, for us, but like it still was so expensive. And so yeah, it was sperm, egg retrieval, all the testing that goes along with that, and then the implantation and the meds. It was over $30,000. So they make it paid over time, like because it's each part, so you're not realizing how absurdly expensive it is.
Yeah, but then you look back at the whole thing, you're like, that was a lot. And as you said, you were fortunate that it didn't take too long or too many tries.
Yeah.
But still, it's so challenging
Yeah.
financially.
I mean, we my first round of for implantation was a natural cycle implantation. So I just had a trigger shot and she took on the first try. So it was $30,000 plus for everything going exactly how the best possible, cheapest option at all times. So it's
Yeah.
pretty absurd. And, as my doctor said, we might have been able to get it covered if we'd gone through extensive testing to prove. But even then, it wasn't that neither of us could conceive and carry. It's just that the best option was to be able to use reciprocal IVF. So, and we were lucky too, because I've heard so many horror stories of same-sex couples going through this where at one point, one mom was asked if she was like the grandma, the aunt. She's like, I'm the mom, like as in like, and we did not
That's
have that
awful.
at Boston IVF. Boston IVF is fantastic for queer couples, and queer families in general. So we never had any of that at all. But it certainly was. I've heard horror stories from other places, and that would have just been another insult on top of all of it. Um, and I always tease my wife. I was like, up until the moment I gave birth, she really had the worst part of the situation because she did the egg retrieval and she was overstimulated. They took 40 eggs from her.
My
Wow.
Yeah.
goodness.
And of course, in other states, they give you Oxy, Percocet to recover. And in Massachusetts, there was like, you can take ibuprofen and Tylenol at the same time.
Yep.
My wife almost dropped an F-bomb on them.
I'm sure that would not have been the first time.
No, no. I mean, she was very close to torsion as well, like from the pain she was
Oh,
experiencing to the point where she
What?
called the line for the nurses and they were like, well, how long does the pain last? And she was like, I don't know, like 7, 8 minutes. And I was like, okay, well, if it goes to 10, go to the ER.
My gosh.
And she was like, okay.
I know. You're like, that seems, I'm pretty close to that. Six to
Yeah.
right. Like the
7 is
2
pretty
extra
close to
minutes,
10.
do they really make that much of
Yeah,
Yeah,
a difference?
exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
So
Yikes.
luckily though, we have plenty of embryos. And so she's doesn't have to do that part
Yeah,
again.
good,
Good.
good.
Yes.
I'm struck by what you said though about the underlying medical issues that actually made this
Mhm.
a really optimal option
Yeah.
for you all clinically as well.
Yeah.
And that's what you're not the first couple that I've heard of that's in that situation where
Mhm.
reciprocal IVF is really appealing for a lot of really valid emotional and family reasons, but
Mhm.
also the best clinically.
Yeah.
And it's still not covered by insurance. And
Mhm.
obviously, you know us at All Paths, we really believe there was a broader view of insurance, and not just because it's the right thing to do, but I just firmly believe the path your family chose to do is a healthier one for
Yeah.
everyone involved. I mean, not to
Yeah.
mention you're investing in the emotional health of this family as well. When you, as much as possible, you're able to have the family that you intended. You know, like if
Yeah.
your wife had felt obligated to carry and deliver
Yeah.
a pregnancy that she didn't want to have, obviously that's starting out in a bad place
Yeah.
emotionally to enter into parenthood. So
Yeah.
it, I think in some ways, I feel like some of the private insurance companies are leading the way in terms of thinking outside the box in terms of
Yeah.
what is covered. And obviously, as usual, the more ingrained insurance plans and the more state-based views
Yeah.
are more outdated. So,
Yeah.
but I'm really happy, obviously, that you were able to do this.
Yes. Well, and she, in the end, like it probably was the cheapest option because, who knows how long it would have
Right.
taken, how many IUIs, how many whatever, and the hormones raging through all of that when, I was very lucky even with my PCOS to just have a first natural cycle take. Because again, my uterus was like, I'm fine.
Yeah. So how long have you known you had PCOS?
Since law school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what made you, like, were you concerned about certain symptoms, or did it somehow just reveal itself?
I had not really had a problem with heavy periods at all because first I was young, and then I was on 18. I went on to birth control because I was not out even to myself at that point. So I was like, just, I'm 18, I'm going to college. Let's, my mom took me, let's be safe. And so I'd been on oral birth control since I was 18. And also, 5 years of that, my cycle was really regular and totally controlled and light. And then I came out to myself and I was like, I don't really need birth control anymore. So I went off birth control because I was using it at the time for purely birth control. And so I went off oral birth control, and then my periods got really weird, really irregular, which they'd never been before, even before I was on birth control when I was a teenager. Very heavy, just a lot of stuff. And then I've always suffered with, and again, because I was a teenager at the time, nobody thought about it, acne, hirsutism, all of those sorts of like more aesthetic symptoms of polycystic ovaries. And in retrospect, I'd probably had a couple cysts burst in college. But I also had perennial sports injuries. So I, in that area, like I had a pelvic floor tear as a college student. So I like didn't know. I was just like, oh, my pain is normal. I'm used to having pain there.
That's awful.
Yeah. So that's very nerdy. I was on the fencing team in college.
That's very cool.
Nerdy, that's cool.
Nerdy.
Or we're nerds, but Emily and I
yes.
think it's cool. So
yeah,
I think it's cool.
I think it's cool.
So yeah, that's sort of I'd always known. And so when I would be talking with doctors about the possibility of conceiving, it was like it could be hard. It could not, the younger the better, just whatever. And then we were starting to think about getting serious about family planning. And then it, a pandemic struck.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no way in, 2020 or early 2021, or even mid 2021 that, we were going to be electively going into doctor's office on a regular basis to try to figure out, what was going on here. And I also really did not want to give birth alone, which was what was happening to parents in that stage. So that kind of pushed things off, but it also got us to a more financially stable point in our lives where we were like, oh, we could afford reciprocal IVF. So that's kind of how we got started. But we did joke a lot because right around that time, my sisters started having kids. And so my grandparents were like, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to start? I'm like, pandemic, first of all. Unlike them, who are just starting, don't know if they later need other interventions. But at the time, we're not using any interventions. Like, we have to leave our house for it. We keep trying without leaving the house, but it's not working. My wife said I wasn't allowed to say that to my grandparents. But it is also fascinating how family and friends feel so entitled to ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
As even if we were a straight couple, what if we were trying? What if we were in this process? And one of my sisters had a really long process of trying to conceive and did not get to the IVF or IUI stage, but was approaching it rapidly and in a state that does not have an insurance mandate for any of her, even her fertility meds or her doctor, her fertility specialist appointments. Tennessee, just call them out. And so, even though they have good insurance, she's a state employee, they have great state health insurance, there's no mandate at all. So, it is fascinating to me how many people in our community, especially within our own families, feel so entitled to ask about something so intimate and so possibly painful that, for us, again, we were very lucky. There was nothing painful about it, but it took more steps. It took more steps than, my cis straight sister who didn't have any trouble conceiving, and so was therefore, despite being the youngest, the first to have kids and all of that. And you could sense my grandparents go, well, come on, catch up. It's like, you start writing the checks if you want the rest of us to catch up.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Like,
You're so right. The this journey impacts so many relationships, not just, I think people immediately think about like, your relationship with your body, your relationship with your partner, but like the whole community at large can feel like they deserve to weigh in on things. And that can make relationships with everybody a little rocky.
Well, and I can also see how it affects people who are expected to have kids the old fashioned way. Obviously, no one in my family thought that it was just going to magically occur. They're all intelligent enough to know that we would have at least had to buy some sperm or get it donated by a friend. But I remember at Boston IVF, even if partners weren't with you, you could tell in the waiting room for the tests who was queer and who was straight, because oftentimes the straight women looked almost ashamed that they had to be there or beaten down by society. And the queer people were like, yeah, we're taking another step. Let's go. Because we don't have an option outside of medical intervention. So there's no stigma in the queer community about needing medical intervention. There's no stigma among our friends and family who are not otherwise homophobic about that either. You're like, well, duh, it's the only way. You can adopt them or you can buy the parts that you don't have. And that made me feel really awful. Like, in terms of just like, this is Massachusetts. We have the highest per capita births to ART. A fact we like to use a lot in the MPA discussions. And you would think that at this point in life, like, there's no shame. I'm sure it's exhausting and all of those things. And perhaps that was just but there was this level of like, I should have been able to do this. And no, I mean, it's just no, for so many reasons, no. And we're so lucky to live in a world where that's not the end of the conversation, that we can keep going. But I just wished I could be like, no, this is happy. You're one step closer. Everything you do here is one step closer.
Yeah, it's certainly not. It shouldn't be, but we know it is a source of shame for people. And it just absolutely shouldn't be, because a lot of other medical conditions make you very sad or very stressed or many things, but usually you're not ashamed of those. So then it's like, why are we ashamed of this? Because it has to do with reproduction, or because it has to do with these embedded gender expectations. I mean, there's like so many layers to it, I think. It's like, why is there shame with this when there isn't to so many other things that are health related? And this is health related.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because it's seen, and in many ways, disabilities in our culture are treated terribly. And it's seen as like a reproductive disability, as if like, though I do enjoy the medical term for my personal infertility, which is social infertility.
I know.
Oh, I hate that.
I hate that.
Oh.
What does that even mean?
I know.
Well, I'm so glad ASRM updated the definition. So now we don't have to use social infertility, as cringy as it is. You can just say, like, infertility covers everyone who might need fertility treatment.
Yeah, the first time I heard that, I was just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. And I mean, social, and when people call it elective, it makes me crazy. I hate them both. I hate both of those terms.
Yeah.
We don't use them. Yeah. And obviously both of those terms are harmful to trying to get insurance to be more inclusive as well.
Yeah, of course.
Because they sound optional.
Right.
Well, I can tell you as an attorney, the non-medical interventions that I could do to get pregnant are not great, legally speaking, nor emotionally speaking, between my wife and I. So
yeah, exactly.
Not only are these medical interventions necessary and preferred by most queer people, they're also, by the legal establishment, legally necessary. The law gets very uncomfortable the further away from the doctor's office conception occurs.
Yeah. Speaking of being an attorney, so I'm so curious, did you always want to be a lawyer? And then how did you get into like art and family formation law?
Yeah. So did I always want to be a lawyer? Yes, I did, because what I really wanted to be was a writer, and everybody told me I couldn't be a starving writer. And so I just picked something that didn't involve having to get a job after graduation. I don't recommend going to law school for any of those reasons. For anyone out there listening who is like, oh, law school seems a great way to delay. No, don't do it. However, I mean, I had prepared for that path and I did enjoy parts of the law. So I interned in college during the summer for a family friend who did real estate and estate planning. And I liked them both. Real estate slightly less than estate planning. I loved estate planning. Um, and then I went to law school, and because I'd had that experience in estate planning, I wanted to sort of, kind of do that. Didn't get an internship paid, but I got a unpaid internship with the probate and family court. And in Massachusetts, the probate, estate, and family are the same courts. So in that process, legally, I sort of started getting more towards the family law, and then eventually, after a few years, even after graduation, dabbling in family law, I came back to estate planning. But at the same time, I was also coming out to myself, and it was 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, the height of the same-sex marriage debate. How do we create families? Family law was a fascinating class in 2012. Windsor coming down about the DOMA case. Prop 8 was in the case, was in there, and Obergefell was decided 2 years after I graduated. So, we were in the thick of that. And so I was very much involved in that, both because it was interesting to me academically and personally. And in my queer rights class, I actually wrote a paper about assisted reproductive technology and intent-based parentage, which is a huge deal. And the MPA is, and I'm a huge proponent of intent-based parenting, which is also around the time they were updating the UPA for the same concepts of it. So I just sort of was the conflation of those things. And then I did 2 years of clerking at the probate and family court, where great cases like the adoption of a minor came through while I was in a court there. I can't talk more about that, but it was there. And, so it was just really cutting edge at the time. It was very interesting to me. And then, because our community likes to stick together, my first job out of the clerkship was with queer attorneys. And then I went and worked for another queer attorney, moved into estate planning. And I'd always been doing confirmatory adoptions and that sort of stuff, and just hooked up with some fantastic mentors in the community and kept going. It's always been really interesting to me how we make families, both emotionally and legally. And also, LGBTQ community has always been on the cutting edge of making families emotionally and legally, and then medically when it's accessible to us. So it's just really fascinating to me about how we define families, how we define parentage, the legal ramifications of parentage. And so that's the part of family law I loved. So when I ran away from the divorce and fighting side of family law, I still took that with me to my estate planning process, because, to be honest, this is the argument I have been making through the entire MPA procedure. Parentage is as much a probate and estate situation as it is a legal custody situation. And in fact, in many states that don't have the probate and family court together, parentage is actually decided by the probate court, because it's about your legal relationship to each other, and then you can duke about custody and family court. So, and it affects inheritance rights, social security, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, in the end, I think I was always super interested in this. And then I got to go through the process myself in a really exciting way, and also got to make jokes about how if you change state lines, which of us is considered the presumed parent changes. So like in some states it's genetic, and in some cases it's gestational. So, or we have an adoption, we are both the legal parents. There's no longer any question of that, but we did laugh about the presumption of what it is. And because we're also different races, it's very funny, because I don't look like my child at all. But it's just really an interesting situation.
Well, I mean, I have like so many things I want to say, but I do love, so your current private practice that you have, I feel like is all of those favorite parts of the law that you have all in one.
Yes.
So you're helping some people with estate law, you're helping clients with family formation, and confirmatory adoptions. So that's just wonderful. I feel like
Yeah.
the practice you have now are all those best pieces put together.
Yeah. I do birth and death and the preparations for both.
Well, I mean, there's really not two more important parts of life than those two.
It's true. It's true. No, and I love that.
Amazing.
And what I love about that is that I get to have these long-term relationships with clients. Obviously, I haven't been practicing enough to have people who I helped create their family then, thank God, have to do their estate plan. But it is this sort of, I have been practicing long enough that I've done updates. I've met people when they were just thinking about kids, and now I've, met their kids, and being this kind of ongoing, because plug, you need to check your estate plan regularly, and you need to look at it. If you have kids, you need to look at it every 1 to 3 years, just because things change. And if they look fine, you're good to go, but take a look. And so I really love having that ongoing relationship with people, and not that separate, but we also do pro bono name changes for the transgender community. When then also helps me, because often with the transgender community, they are very aware of, they've created families or planning on creating families in very similar ways, and they appreciate having an attorney who can talk about those things with them just very like matter of factly, and not like, oh, you froze your sperm. Yeah, of course, like you wanted it, you froze. Okay, sounds good. Same,
Yeah, it's great to have that. Yeah.
That's nice.
That is wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm so
really
glad you do that. And I know I've personally sent families your way because it is so important, especially in this current environment, to know that the person you're talking to, obviously, most importantly, is knowledgeable, but almost, or as important, is that they're going to be welcoming and compassionate and kind. And so that is so wonderful. But I was also thinking reciprocal IVF is an awesome thing to put legislators in their place when they are like, genetics is the most important thing. And you're like, but so it's her egg, but she gave birth. And they're like, you actually watch their brain explode.
And we both intend to parent the child. So no, it's not a surrogate.
Right. Yeah, she is not a surrogate. She is one of the mothers.
Yeah.
And but I do love to throw, again, I usually am not someone who throws things at people to make them squirm, but if they're being rigid about something like that, genetics is the most important thing about parenthood, then I'm fine with throwing a real family, and not a scenario, not an anecdote.
No.
A real, wonderful, hard-fought family. I love to say, okay, well, here's a amazing family in your state. Who are the legal parents here and why?
Yeah.
And then they try to use genetics, and I'm like, well, let me tell you a little bit more about them.
Yes.
So
I mean, and also the reality is there are a lot of families out there, putting aside adoption, sperm donation, anything, there are plenty of families in which not both parents are genetically related.
Right.
Everyone involved doesn't always know that, but it is still true. And so I think by reducing it to genetics instead of intent, it's just truly, and Massachusetts law was already very pro intent, in the sense that the marital presumption is very strong in Massachusetts. So to be very traditional, the man who raised a child is far more important than the man whose sperm created the child, was ancient law in Massachusetts. So, I think that once people get over the reaction to that's new and weird, or like, oh, that's, there's queerness, why is there a doctor involved? Oh, are you picking the babies for certain things? Or, once they get past that sort of like, oh, that's weird, it's like, oh, it's not that different. It's not that different from what people have always been doing, creating families and protecting our rights to each other. And so no, I find that super fascinating, and really interesting. Reciprocal IVF is also really fun because I get to look straight people in the eye and tell them my wife knocked me up. She took her DNA and it was put inside of me, and I created life.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, but then she also sometimes calls me a 3D printer. She says she and the donor gave me the instructions and I 3D printed a baby.
I kind of like that. I haven't heard that one before. That's pretty
Yeah, it's
funny.
not that far off, like that's the information
Yeah.
packet
Oh,
is the
I
DNA.
know.
And yeah, it's also so interesting to me, like even just looking at my daughter and
Mhm.
like nature versus nurture versus
Mm.
DNA versus mitochondrial DNA versus like it's so interesting to me because you know
Yeah.
we aren't the same race, but she's biracial as well. So it's like I think that people look at us and no one assumes we're not related unless my wife is standing there and then they're like, oh, those two belong together. I'm like, no, all three of us belong together.
Yeah. No, we are a family. Thank you very much.
But it also, I have to say, like the thing that I'm sure so many families have to deal with, that it's maddening because I can think of so many scenarios is, we went to a new doctor recently and they're asking her medical history, my daughter's medical history, like familial history, and they have mother's history and father's history. And I'm like,
Mm.
I understand that genetically, like you need my medical history is not very relevant to what's going on with her. And that's fine. I'm not saying I need you to ask. There's just so many other ways to phrase it. Like, even if you just put like genetic mother, genetic father, like, because that would at least go towards like what you're actually looking for. Because, like, how are you supposed to fill that out if your kid's from a stranger adoption, if you used sperm donation, if you used whatever? And I just think I was surprised because it was here in Boston. I thought they'd be a little more with it. And they asked for her pronouns, which I was like, she's 2.5. I don't know what her pronouns are. Actually, I do know what her pronouns are. This is after. Her pronouns now are baby, baby hungry, baby this, baby that, or Maya this, Maya that. Yeah, so that's her pronouns. Anyway, it's just really exhausting to like have to try to like just, even though it's like I know how to fill it out. It's fine. It just feels icky. And then,
Mhm.
it was so funny with at the OB. They handed me the medical history form at our first appointment, and I handed it back and I said, which ones are relevant for my pregnancy and which ones are relevant for the fetus? Because they're two different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such a good point. And I think that's a lot of times what we
Mhm.
have to wrestle with is like, what are we asking and why? Because there are times when they're asking the questions about you too as parents,
Yeah.
not genetically, you and Anna's parents, not genetic parents. But like you're saying, on that medical history form, they were asking about her genetic makeup.
And I get why that's relevant. I totally get why it's relevant.
Right.
Right. It's relevant, but let's update the way we ask. And I think we have to think of why.
And how you're asking. Like
Yeah.
the forms might seem like a minor piece, but they can go a long way to signaling that like you're a welcoming, affirming place and provider. Like Polly talked a lot about that in episode 2 about like how
Yeah.
words, even as on something like a form, like that still sends a message about your values to the people that you work with.
Right. And just a very simple adding of genetic
Yeah.
in those things. Or even a sentence at the top that like these questions are about your medical history, the words mother and father are used, and we're talking about the genetic contributors.
That's perfect. It does not take much to
Right?
update a form to say that.
No. And then also like, with anonymous donor sperm, filling out any medical history form is just hilarious. They're like, you don't have anything on the file. I'm like, I know he was not positive for like these things that wouldn't have worked well with us.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Like, it's like,
Right. Yeah.
on purpose.
Yeah. I know very little else.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, no. So, yeah, that's,
Mhm.
it's, both legally doing confirmatory adoptions, name changes, estate planning documents. My wife often asks me right now, like, how are you getting through the political life of things? I'm like, I make money sometimes. I do the work of helping people in actual ways that make a real difference here and now in substantial practical ways. And that's how I get through it, right? Is I have that ability, that privilege, and I get to do it. And so for me, that's how I do it. And it's also I get to build family. Do you know how many baby pictures come through my email all the time? And it's
That's the
wonderful.
best.
And so that's the other side of things is like it's the joy side of things, right? We're making families, we're protecting families. And so that's what has always drawn me to the work. And I appreciate even more now that I've done it myself. I can talk to the experiences, and also I knew a little bit more going in than I think a lot of my friends did. And I think that's another thing is it shouldn't be so mysterious what happens in ART. Like, we should be able to talk about it more. We should be able to, honestly, my big thing is people should be taught the legal ramifications of having kids and getting married in like high school, because you're signing yourself up, even if it's an accident, like you're signing yourself up for a lot. And I think it's something that should be taught so people know what they're doing. But it should also be taught as part of sex ed. This is how you make a baby this way. This is how medicine helps. Again, going towards our point of not having it had such a stigma.
I just loved that clip, just where you were talking about the joy of this job. And I feel like joy is resistance right now and helping people in tangible ways.
Well, and that's how we get through, is like we all help each other in the ways that we can.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, there are two questions that we like to ask all of our guests, and we'd love to get your thoughts on these. The first is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family? And the flip side is, what's one thing that you wish people would never say to someone who lets them know that they might be struggling to build a family?
Yeah. When I hear that someone is starting, I just say good luck, because we never know what process that's going to take us down. I'm very open about my own story, so I am very much a resource for anyone who wants to ask about that, and I love to talk about it all the time. And so, I wish, we've said before, removing the stigma, I wish people knew more about what it looks like, that it isn't, even though it is still too expensive and still insurance isn't covering enough, it is still in many states much more accessible than you think it is. It is not this horror, and it's a spectrum. You could need 2 seconds of intervention, or you could need several rounds of IVF or any other combination, and just take it one step at a time. So good luck, patience. And I just wish people had a little more awareness and knowledge and education about what goes into fertility treatment. Then we don't jump to one or the other unless you're gay and decided reciprocal IVF was the way you wanted to go. And then you jump right into the deep end immediately.
But it's what worked best for your family. So
exactly. So, and I was lucky enough to be aware of it.
Yeah.
So that we knew what we could do, and that we didn't get held up on, well, now we can never have the family we want.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think you've mentioned it already. Like, you came in with a lot of background knowledge that most folks just don't have. So it could have been a much longer process just because you were still learning your options.
Yeah. And a lot more angst and a lot more frustration and problems between my wife and I, because we couldn't decide who was ready for what and all of those sorts of things. But knowing that we could make a family the way we wanted to is so good for everyone involved, and so good for Maya, though we can never tell her that she was the highest ranked embryo. Like sibling drama fodder. And then what you should never say is, well, first of all, don't provide unsolicited advice. Like, you never know what they've tried and not tried. At the very most, if you do have experience in the area, just to say, hey, I went through this. If there's ever anything you want to talk about or ask about or just commiserate about, I'm here. But never, oh, have you tried this, this, and this? Or never do this. Oh, you better make sure you have a natural and not medicated implantation, because, like those meds, they mess you up. Just keep it to yourself. Just keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
And then secondly, just stop asking families when they're going to have kids. They'll tell you if it's what they want.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Annika. It was so great talking with you and hearing about your own family story and the work that you do. Yeah. If anybody's looking to get in touch, we'll put your website link in the show notes.
Sounds great. I would love to chat to anyone. If anyone mentions All Paths, I will be extra excited and probably throw a discount your way. So,
oh, thank you. That's really sweet.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. and follow us on social media at All Paths FB or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. All Paths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a shout out to our rainbow sponsor, Illume Fertility. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.